On this episode of the Mark 5 Big Turbo build, we are back at Black Forest Racing again with Cody, and we're going to be doing some stuff with mounting the oil filter done, trim up these AN lines, get that stuff sorted, finish the cooling system, and change the fuel pump. Change the fuel pump and pump out any old fuel that will be in here. We'll show you how to do that. Okay, so this car has been sitting for a long time. Before we go ahead and change the fuel pump, we're going to go ahead and disconnect this fuel line so that we can pump all of the old, stale, bad fuel out of the system before we change the pump and start running that through everything. So this fuel line rail that runs over across the top of the intake manifold has actually been modified. We've welded a AN6 fitting on here so that the fuel line is with an AN hose. Your stock stuff would have a plastic line with little quick connects on it. So we'll go ahead and pull this off and get a rag here in case any fuel comes out. This car hasn't run in a little while, so it probably won't have too much fuel in here. Yeah, not a whole lot. So now that we've got that disconnected, we'll go ahead and stick this line into a bucket and drain the fuel into it. And use a scan tool when we're connected to the OBD2 port to do an output test on the fuel pump, and that will allow us to pump all the fuel out of this car and get it drained. Now, luckily, this car did not have too much fuel in it. The low fuel light is on, and shouldn't take too long to get this drained out. And now we're empty. So we'll go ahead and turn off that test. We can wipe off the excess fuel on here and go ahead and hook this back up to the fuel rail. Okay, so here we have the TTRS fuel pump. The TTRS cars are all-wheel drive, obviously, and they have this extra hose that allows it to pick up fuel on the other side of the tank since it has a hump in the middle to go over the drive shaft. Now, we're putting this in the GTI. Obviously, it's a front-wheel drive car. We need to block this off. Now, how we're going to do that is we have an extra bit of fuel hose, and this fitting here is exactly the same as that one. So we're going to crimp the end of this and seal it shut with some soldering iron, and yeah, so we'll show you that, and that'll get popped in there and then it'll be ready to go in the fuel tank. So the soldering iron is just putting out some hot air and melting the end of this shut with the pliers squeezing it, obviously. And now it's all sealed up. Okay, so we already did a video showing in depth on the whole install of this TTRS pump, but we got to go ahead and pull the seat out, which just pulls up in the front, and then you push it towards the back of the car and it slides out. There's like a little double hook in here, and then you just pull the seat belts out of here, which are usually kind of difficult, but they just slide out. And then you can flip this up. The seat belt is bolted in through this, so we're not going to pull this all the way out, but we're just going to flip it up here on top of the parcel shelf so it's out of the way. Now that gives us access to the fuel pump control module and the fuel pump underneath of that. So it's usually quite dirty under here. And this can just be pulled out with the one plug holding it on. You can set that off to the side and disconnect our fuel lines, which are just there is a button you push here, and then the whole thing just pulls right up. And you can set those aside. And we have to remove the fuel pump ring, which will require a tool. Okay, so there probably is a special tool for this, but what pretty much everybody does is use like a pry bar or a screwdriver. You can put it on the lip of one of the tabs that's holding this in, and you can just tap it with a hammer, and then the whole ring will rotate. Maybe.
It's been in there a while.
This has been in here a while. There it goes. And you can pull this ring out under these fuel lines. And then we're going to vacuum up all this dirt, so when we lift this up, all the dirt and dust and debris doesn't fall into our fuel tank. And it doesn't need to be spotless. It's not always 100% required, but you definitely don't want to You want to avoid getting as much dirt in your fuel tank as possible. So once that's out, the fuel pump will just lift up, and you might have to fish it around with the fuel level sender and the fuel lines. Can kind of make it sometimes difficult to get this out of here. So you usually just have to like wiggle it until you find the right angle that this will kind of lift up a little bit at a time. And it can also sometimes get hung up on the gasket here. You want to be careful that you don't lift up and rip this thing off, because this is what gives your fuel tank the level reading. Okay, so normally when you're doing a TTRS fuel pump install, you're going to want to transfer over the level sender from your existing pump into this because they're calibrated differently. This particular car is actually a very early 2006, which uses a different style fuel pump. As you see, the level sensor is on this side, and on this one it's in here, and the arms are at totally different angles. So we're not going to do anything about transferring that over, and in this particular car, we're just going to deal with the fuel pressure or the fuel level being wrong and go off the odometer and just deal with it that way. But while we have this out, we're going to go ahead and install our sealed end plug in this port that we made. So that will just click in there, and then this is ready to go drop into the car. Okay, so you got to make sure you put your gasket back on, and then we can go ahead and drop this back down into the tank. Being careful again about that level sensor, that you don't get that hung up on that when you drop it in here. Move these fuel lines out of the way and tuck all this other junk back down into the tank here. Bonus points for doing this in a two-door where it's significantly less comfortable. And once this is lined back up, you can do the opposite of what we did before and just tap this back in, and it won't work. And there it goes. So now that that's clipped in there, after much struggle, plug your fuel lines back on, and then we're going to leave this off currently until we install the PM3 fuel pump control module, which we have another video installing that, so we're not going to show that for you, but that will go directly into there.
Okay, while Max is working on pumping out the fuel in the car, I'm going to deal with these two coolant pipes that need an AN fitting welded to the end of them. This one got cut a little crooked, so I'm going to have to clean up the cut, grind all the paint off of here, and then get the TIG welder out and do some welding. Okay, this coolant pipe had a couple of extra fittings on it with extra hoses that we're not going to be using on this custom build. We need to weld an AN fitting to the end of this to run it to the reservoir, but I don't want to have to deal with filling in this hole, so we're going to go ahead and just cut it off a little bit shorter than we already had so that we can get that over with. All right, now that both of our pipes are cut to the length that we want, we're going to go ahead and get the paint off of them with our wire brush here. All right, we've got our pipes with the paint sanded off them. We've got a steel AN-12 weld bung here. We're going to go ahead and tack it together first and then proceed to weld it so we can get this one pipe made. All right, so now on this pipe we also ended up with one unused hole here. I'm going to just go ahead and weld that guy shut. Now we have one more pipe to weld here. Normally you would want to take the rubber hose off before you go and get it really hot, but a lot of these Volkswagen rubber hoses get stuck onto the metal piece, and we've tried to get this one off and it won't come off. So we're just going to leave it. Now because this fitting, we're actually reusing one from a pipe that we put together earlier, and we kind of made a mistake on it, so we decided to reuse this fitting. And then I just drilled out the center of it so this pipe will fit in it. I'm actually not even adding any filler material because there's already a lot of extra filler material that's on the fitting. Okay, now that we've got those steel coolant pipes welded, we're going to work on this, which is our upper radiator hose. We've got an AN6 fitting here that we're going to install, which will be the vent over to the catch can to let any air that's trapped in the system bleed out from the highest point. So we're going to run this right along the top of this pipe. We're going to put this fitting right about here, which, if we could look at it from this angle, is roughly the top of the system. And so that will let any trapped air bleed out of it. And put it right about here. And also mark the center line of the pipe, and then I'll just carry these over by eye to make a cross to set it on. So we've got our pipe removed. We did mark it so that we can put it right back in the same position on the car. We have our 2 marks for our fittings. I'm going to go ahead and drill a pilot hole first. All right, and now that we got that one marked, we have another one to go on the bottom. We've got this steel coolant pipe that's going to run. This is the bypass for the thermostat. So when the thermostat is cold, this will allow the coolant to bypass the radiator and recirculate in the system. That way the water pump doesn't cavitate and the coolant still flows. So this one's going to go on the bottom, and we're going to have a 90-degree fitting that comes up and attaches to it. So now we can take this upper pipe off, take it over to the welding table, drill some holes in it, and get these fittings installed.
Okay, now that this fitting is welded on here, we can test fit this fitting so we can find out how long we need to cut the hose. Take a piece of tape, line it up roughly where we want it, put the piece of tape on it to mark where to cut it. So now that we've marked this hose where it needs to be cut with the tape, we can go ahead and cut it. We're just using a die grinder with a cutoff wheel. And we can assemble our AN fitting. Now we have these special jaws in the vise here that are made out of aluminum so that you can clamp your fitting in here and not mar it. Okay, and once it'll start getting a bit tighter here as it's pinching and engaging the hose, take our AN wrench. Okay, so that's tightened down. Now a good rule of thumb to make sure you get these tight enough is you want to have about a fingernail's gap in between these 2 parts of the fitting. Once you get that done, we're ready to go install this hose in the car. We've got a couple more to make, so we'll go ahead and get those made and get into them installed. Okay, now that we've made all of our AN lines and got it welded to the pipe, everything's all set. We can go ahead, thread it on and tighten. This is a temporary hose. You see the fittings don't match, and it's just a rubber hose. We're missing one fitting that we need, but we want to get this on and pressure test the system. So we're going to get this in here. It should do the job for just now. Okay, now they're all tight. We can go ahead and put the core support on, get this hooked up to the radiator, put some water in it, and pressure test to see if we have any leaks anywhere. Okay, so we went ahead and put the core support on, radiator's in here. We're going to take our upper hose and then go ahead and snap this onto the radiator. It has the quick connects, goes right on. Latches in, that's done. We can tighten these T-bolt clamps. Those are good. We've already tightened everything else, so now what we're going to do is fill the system, check it for leaks. Fill her up. We will be using coolant in this car, but for the time being, since this is going to have to come apart a couple more times most likely to get the intercooler piping and all that stuff done, we're just filling it up with water for testing purposes. Okay, so we don't actually have a pressure tester that will work with this, unfortunately. So what we're going to do is put this radiator cap on and then start the car, get it warm, and see if it leaks. We're going to also hook a jump box up to it so that we can then start the car, because apparently she's a little bit dead. Perhaps. Good news is the turbo is still spinning, so that sounds much better than previously. Maybe we should open the door. It's kind of hazy in here.
A little bit hazy in here.
It's a lot hazy. If it were like running 100% properly, it would sound pretty good. Like the sound it makes is not bad. All right guys, so that's it for this episode of our Mark V big turbo build. We got some things we could cross off the list today. The cooling system is done. The vacuum pump delete, we installed that. It's just a plug, it presses in. We didn't show you that. The oil filter is indeed mounted. We didn't show you guys hooking up the last little bit of it, but it's hooked up temporarily enough to run. Obviously you saw the car run for a while. We got to take it off so it gets powder coated and all that stuff, so it's just kind of temporary right now, but it's done. We did also finish plumbing the turbo and install the low pressure fuel pump. So that leaves us, we've got some stuff to tighten, kind of just, the car's been apart for so long, we've done so much to it that it's got to get a whole once over. We did a bunch of stuff underneath with the subframe and all that stuff's tight, but just give it a whole once over on that. We've got to finish the charge pipes. It says throttle body pipe. That's really all the charge pipes, intercooler piping, all that stuff. Mount the blow-off valve. That kind of goes along with that. Clean up some of the wiring. We're not using the diverter valve and 75, all that stuff anymore. That's all gone. So we got to clean up that wiring, bleed the clutch again. It works now, but it's not really all the way done. And get a boost controller in it. And then most important parts, obviously, do some sweet burnouts. So, well on the way. Should be getting there soon. Hopefully in the next episode we'll get some more of this stuff checked off and we can actually maybe drive it around a little bit or something. I don't know, that might be a little bit ambitious. But yeah, so thanks for watching. Let us know what you think. If you've got anything else you want to see or any more details you want. I'm sure once the car is done we'll do a whole breakdown of everything that's on it and all that stuff. But thanks for watching.
Like and comment and like the Black Forest Racing page too.
Black Forest Racing, yeah, go check them out. Denver, North Carolina.